So I want you to imagine something. You're sprinting through a crowded airport concourse.
Oh, the classic stress nightmare.
Right. Your rolling suitcase is just bouncing erratically behind you, hitting your ankles. You're sweating.
Yep.
And you've got laser focus on the gate doors. You literally see the agent's hand reach out to pull that heavy glass shut.
It is the worst feeling in the world.
It really is. And you throw yourself forward, right? You're gasping, waving your boarding pass like a maniac. And well, you made it to the physical location.
Right.
But you were there in time to watch the door lock. You were not on time to actually board the aircraft.
Exactly. And that singular, tiny distinction between those two nearly identical phrases, I mean, it basically encapsulates the entire spectrum of human panic and relief.
It really does, which is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to today's Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Our mission today is to unpack a really fascinating transcript from the SpeakUp Sessions English Podcast. The hosts, Ian and Maya, put together this incredibly practical lesson.
Yeah, the source material focuses on 3 specific phrases that trip up even native English speakers, in time, on time, and at a time.
Right. And on the surface, this is an accessible, everyday language lesson. But our goal today is to go deeper. We're looking at what this source material reveals about how human beings use language.
Because it's not just about grammar.
No, not at all. It's about how we establish social contracts, how we manage our physiological stress responses, and even how we set boundaries.
It's a profound window into human categorization. I mean, Ian and Maya designed this just to help people practice everyday English, but the examples they chose, they inadvertently map out this invisible architecture of our societal expectations.
Oh, absolutely. It's like they're pulling back the curtain on how a single preposition dictates whether you are, a reliable member of society or basically an agent of chaos.
An agent of chaos. I love that.
So let's pull that curtain back all the way. I want to start with the most rigid construct they talk about.
The expectation of precision, being on time.
Yes. Maya introduces this concept by giving 2 very specific scenarios in the transcript. She talks about a train arriving and a student coming to class.
Right, and then Ian defines the parameter really clearly. He says it means arriving exactly at the scheduled or expected time.
Exactly. Not a minute late. And crucially, and this was so interesting, not a minute early either.
Yeah, that refusal to accept an early arrival is what separates this from just being punctual. On time is a binary state.
It's like throwing a dart and hitting the absolute dead center of the bullseye. There's no gray area. You either hit the scheduled mark or you missed it.
And if you look at the examples the original hosts used, the train network and the classroom, I mean, those aren't accidental choices.
No, they're highly structured environments.
Exactly. They represent these massive interlocking gears in the machinery of civilization. Think about a train network. It operates on the premise of absolute, unwavering predictability.
Right. If a train arrives 5 minutes early and departs early, it leaves people behind.
And if it arrives 5 minutes late, what happens? It misses a track switch, which forces a delay on some secondary line. And suddenly, that cascades into total systemic gridlock.
It's a system that demands perfect compliance.
It really does.
And if we look at Maya's second example, the student entering the classroom, it's essentially functioning on the exact same principle, just scaled down to human interaction.
Oh, for sure. A lecture that starts at, say, 10 a.m., that represents a really fragile social contract.
Between the instructor and the audience, right?
Yeah. The classroom is this whole ecosystem of shared attention. When a latecomer pushes open a heavy, creaking door at 10:05, they aren't just failing a math equation about the clock.
They're violating the contract.
Violently breaking the focus of 30 other people. They are demanding that the instructor actually halts the transfer of knowledge just to acknowledge their disruption.
The source transcript actually includes a grimacing emoji right when they mention arriving at 10:05.
Which is perfect. It completely captures that visceral, awkward communal friction of failing to be on time. You can feel the cringe.
But wait, I want to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, lay it on me.
Because we're examining why language developed this strict binary. But isn't the whole concept of being on time often just an illusion of control?
How do you mean?
Well, we construct these incredibly brittle societal schedules, right? The 10 a.m. class, the 8:15 train. And then we judge humans for failing to meet this impossible standard of mechanical precision in a world that is, frankly, highly unpredictable.
So you're saying it's an unfair metric?
Kind of. Traffic happens, weather happens. It feels like a setup for failure.
That is a totally fair critique of modern scheduling. But, and this is key, it actually reinforces why the linguistic distinction exists in the first place.
Okay, unpack that for me.
We invented the concept of being on time specifically because the natural world is chaotic. It's our collective defense mechanism against unpredictability.
So it's a mutual agreement to pretend we have control.
Yes. When Ian emphasizes that 10 a.m. is the only acceptable arrival for a 10 a.m. class, he is outlining the threshold of trust.
Right.
On time is not just about the position of the hands on a clock. It's the metric by which we measure another person's respect for our collective reality.
Wow. Okay, so it serves as this baseline of reliability. If you can hit that exact temporal coordinate, you're deemed trustworthy by the tribe.
Exactly. You proved you can overcome the chaos of the world to honor the agreement.
But that leads us directly into the second linguistic reality that they present in the SpeakUp Sessions transcript.
Right, because nobody can be perfect all the time.
Exactly. Life cannot be lived entirely on this knife's edge of absolute precision. We need a safety net.
And the source material defines that safety net as being in time.
Yes. So, unlike the rigidity of on time, Maya defines in time as being early enough, specifically before something happens.
And Ian immediately follows up her definition with the real psychological crux of the matter. He says you're early enough to avoid a problem.
Avoid a problem. Let's dissect that specific phrasing. The examples provided in the transcript are catching a bus and reaching a movie theater before the film begins.
Two very relatable scenarios.
Right. So if a movie starts at 7 p.m., Maya points out that arriving at 6:50 or 6:55 means you are in time.
You made it before the cutoff.
But from a strictly analytical perspective, and play devil's advocate with me here, isn't in time just a socially acceptable rationalization for being sloppy?
Sloppy.
Yeah. Isn't just a less precise version of on time? It feels like a linguistic loophole for people who can't hit the bullseye we just talked about.
I see where you're going with that, but the source text actually argues actively against that interpretation. It's not a failure of precision at all.
No.
It's about the successful navigation of a sequence. Think about the mechanics of attending a movie.
Okay, walking into the lobby.
Right. The 7 p.m. start time is the objective. But to achieve that objective, you have to buy a ticket, navigate the crowded lobby, find your specific theater, locate an empty seat in the dark, and actually physically settle yourself.
Oh, I see. So arriving at exactly 7 p.m., being purely on time, would actually be a disaster.
Exactly. You'd miss the entire opening scene while you're fumbling around in the dark spilling popcorn.
So the buffer zone isn't a loophole. It's a mandatory requirement for the event to actually be successful.
Precisely. It is a demonstration of temporal maturity, honestly. You are anticipating the friction of the physical world.
That makes so much sense.
When the hosts talk about arriving in time to catch a bus, they're highlighting this closing window of opportunity. The bus is idling. The doors are open, but they aren't going to remain open indefinitely.
Right. The language captures that physiological experience of moving through that closing window.
Yes. There's a massive emotional shift between these two phrases. Being on time feels very cold. It's clinical. It's mechanical.
It's the hum of anxiety.
Yes. But being in time, that carries this heavy undercurrent of relief. It's that cinematic exhale when you slide into your seat just as the trailers end and the studio logo pops up on the screen.
The problem was successfully avoided.
You can almost map the cortisol levels of these two phrases.
Oh, totally. The effort to be perfectly on time is just constant monitoring. You're checking your watch, adjusting your walking speed, calculating traffic lights.
But the experience of being in time is characterized by that sharp spike of panic like you running through the airport, followed by a massive full-body release of tension.
The buffer zone absorbed the chaos, and you survived.
You survived the closing window.
It really makes you wonder how often we miscategorize our own daily actions. Like, we punish ourselves for not meeting the cold precision of being on time when the actual logical goal was just arriving in time to manage the task.
We hold ourselves to the standard of a train schedule when we really just need to be a moviegoer.
That's a great way to put it. But just as we get comfortable with these temporal frameworks, the precision and the buffer, the source material completely upends the board.
Oh, yeah. The third phrase.
Maya introduces at a time, and she gives this clear warning that it operates on an entirely different axis.
The temporal anchor is just completely severed here.
It really is. Ian explicitly defines at a time as meaning one by one or simultaneously in a specific number.
So we're not even talking about the clock anymore.
Not at all. The examples in the transcript are incredibly visual. Maya talks about entering a room 2 people at a time, studying one subject at a time, or limiting an exam entrance to 3 students at a time.
The fundamental nature of the word time has been altered.
Yes, it no longer means hours or minutes. It's been transformed into a metric of spatial volume and cognitive load.
We're witnessing this huge cognitive leap from scheduling to physical management. Think about a sign that says, "Please enter the room 2 people at a time." It's functioning exactly like a pressure valve on an industrial pipe. If all the water tries to flow through at once, the pipe bursts.
Right, total system failure.
So the instruction uses the word time to define an instance, or a batch. It regulates the flow of bodies through a threshold to prevent collapse.
It's the bouncer at the nightclub door.
Exactly.
The bouncer unclips the velvet rope, lets 2 people step through, and then immediately closes it again. The anxiety of the clock is gone, and it's replaced by the immediate physical reality of mass and space.
Managing flow.
But what I find even more compelling is Maya's example of studying one subject at a time, because that takes the pressure valve concept and applies it internally to the human brain.
It's cognitive funneling. I mean, human working memory is remarkably limited.
Right, we can only hold so much in our heads at once.
If a student attempts to simultaneously process advanced calculus, historical dates, and foreign verb conjugations, the cognitive pipe bursts. They retain absolutely nothing.
So by dictating that the student studies one subject at a time, the language is establishing a psychological boundary.
It's a defense mechanism against the modern disease of overwhelm.
Which fundamentally changes the utility of the phrase. If you think about it, on time and in time are primarily descriptive.
Descriptive.
You use them to report the outcome of an event. Like, oh, I made it in time. But at a time is almost exclusively prescriptive.
That's true. Ian actually notes in the transcript that it's used for giving instructions or talking about limits. It's a command.
It forces order upon chaos.
And if we look at the pedagogical architecture of what Ian and Maya have constructed in this single, relatively short podcast episode, it's quite staggering.
It really is brilliant.
They begin by tethering the listener to the strict external authority of the clock,
Right.
the train schedule.
Yep.
Then they introduce the concept of personal agency through the buffer zone, in time.
Giving you some wiggle room.
And then finally, they abandon the clock entirely. They teach the listener how to establish physical and mental boundaries against the crushing weight of sheer volume.
And that progression perfectly sets up the synthesis they provide at the very end of their lesson. Because, it's one thing to analyze these concepts in isolation.
But life doesn't happen in isolation.
Exactly. Human existence requires us to juggle all 3 of these realities simultaneously. And in what Ian accurately calls a perfect sentence, Maya delivers this ultimate masterclass in contextualizing all 3 phrases.
I love this sentence. I was geeking out over the educational design of this.
Read the sentence for us.
Okay, the sentence is, I arrived on time for the meeting, just in time to grab coffee, and we entered the room 2 people at a time.
Let's break down the complex choreography of that single sentence, because it basically encapsulates the entirety of a modern professional morning.
It really does.
Okay, Act 1. I arrived on time for the meeting. The baseline societal contract has been fulfilled.
The individual has proven their reliability to the tribe. They hit the scheduled bullseye.
But immediately, we move to Act 2. Just in time to grab coffee.
Now this reveals a hidden layer of strategy.
How so?
Well, the individual recognized a secondary biological need, caffeine, and calculated that they had a sufficient buffer window to execute a side mission.
A side mission. I love that.
Without violating the primary directive of the meeting schedule, they successfully navigated the closing window of the coffee cart line before it was too late.
They utilize the buffer. And then we get the final transition, Act 3, and we entered the room 2 people at a time.
The shift from time to space.
Exactly. The individual shifts from managing their personal timeline and their biological needs to managing the spatial reality of the physical environment. They are actively preventing a bottleneck at the doorway.
And what's so crazy is if you alter a single preposition in that narrative, the entire structure disintegrates into total absurdity.
Oh, let's hear it.
Imagine saying, I arrived in time for the meeting, just at a time to grab coffee, and we entered the room 2 people on time.
It's linguistic nonsense.
It means nothing. The prepositions are literally the load-bearing pillars of our shared reality.
And to ensure the listener truly grasps this, The source material doesn't just, hand over the master sentence and walk away.
No, they make it interactive.
Right. Maya initiates a practice time segment. She challenges the audience with fill-in-the-blank scenarios, and she explicitly tells the listener to pause the episode and think about your answers.
That direct call to action is so important. That's the mechanism that transforms passive consumption into permanent knowledge.
Let's walk through those challenges. The first one asks how we got to the airport to catch a flight.
Which we know from the intro is the ultimate high-stakes environment.
Yes. So the answer, logically, is in time. The airport requires the ultimate buffer zone to navigate security theater, gate changes, tram delays.
You're avoiding the ultimate problem of missing the flight.
The second challenge involves a meeting starting, which, as we discussed, demands the strict communal agreement of on time.
The tribal contract.
Right. But the third challenge shifts the context entirely. It asks how to take a prescribed set of tablets.
Please take these tablets one, blank.
And the answer is at a time.
This specific example is brilliant because it moves the concept of boundaries from just spatial flow like people in a doorway to literal biology and safety.
Yeah, taking medication requires rigid adherence to dosage limits.
Ingesting 4 tablets simultaneously when the instruction demands one at a time isn't a logistical error. It's a profound physical hazard. The language is actively protecting the organism.
It's a boundary that keeps you alive, which actually brings us to the medium delivering this lesson in the first place. Maya and Ian conclude their podcast by encouraging the listener to practice a little every day,
stating that it is the key to fluency.
And Ian signs off by promising to help you improve one episode at a time.
See, the hosts are brilliantly applying their own linguistic lesson to their educational philosophy. Oh, that's so true.
They are basically acting as the cognitive bouncer at the door of the listener's mind.
Unpack that. How is the podcast format functioning like a bouncer?
Well, think about a massive, comprehensive textbook on English grammar. It tries to shove the entire language through the pipe simultaneously.
Which causes immediate overwhelm. The pipe bursts.
Exactly. But a daily, bite-sized audio show. It unclips the velvet rope, lets a single, highly refined concept enter the listener's brain, and then gently shuts the gate until tomorrow.
Wow. It's the perfect integration of medium and message. The podcast format fits seamlessly into the buffer zones of modern life.
Yes. You consume this knowledge while you're arriving in time for your commute. You're utilizing the transitional moments of your day to build a more robust understanding of the world.
So to solidify that understanding for you, our listener, let's look at the ultimate architecture we've uncovered today from this source.
Let's do the recap. On time is the gear that keeps the societal machine turning. It's the absolute demand for precision that allows interconnected systems to function without collapsing.
And in time is your psychological safety net. It's that calculated buffer zone that lets us absorb the friction of reality and avoid negative outcomes with that cinematic exhale of relief.
And finally, at a time, is the physical and cognitive boundary. It's the abandonment of the clock entirely in favor of managing volume. It protects our physical spaces from bottlenecks and our minds from total overload.
And honestly, when you master these distinctions, you stop being a passive victim of the clock.
You become an active architect of your temporal reality.
Which leaves us with a rather profound realization to carry forward from this whole deep dive.
We have spent this time exploring how 3 almost invisible tiny phrases dictate the boundaries of trust, panic, and physical safety in our daily lives.
The implications extend so far beyond just scheduling a meeting or catching a bus.
Right. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If the difference between seamlessly navigating society and completely disrupting it comes down to a single 2-letter preposition.
A tiny shift in vocabulary.
Exactly. How many other subtle linguistic invisible fences are we walking into every single day, completely unaware that our reality is being shaped by the absolute smallest syllables in our vocabulary?
A question worth considering. One interaction at a time.
Until next time, keep examining the hidden structures around you.